The message arrived on a
Initiating
Tuesday,
system
delivered through the
diagnostics.
standard
All
military
systems
channels
known on
that
sheds.
General
Maintain
Marcus Kane had
formation,
grown
standing
accustomed
by.
to over his 23 years of service. The holographic display flickered to life in his sparse quarters aboard the UES Retribution, casting blue light across the worn photographs that lined his desk. Among them, a small frame held the image of a 7-year-old girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile, her arms wrapped around a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Whiskers. Admiral Chen's weathered face materialized in the projection, his expression grave in a way that made Kane's stomach clench before the words even began. "Marcus, I need you to sit down for this?" Kane remained standing, his scarred hands gripping the edge of his desk. 23 years of military service had taught him that bad news didn't hurt any less when delivered to a seated man. "There's been an incident on Kepler, 442b. Chen continued, his voice carefully measured. "The colony, Marcus, I'm sorry. There were no survivors." The words hit Kane like a physical blow, but it was the pause that followed that truly shattered him. Chen's eyes, filled with the weight of delivering such news, met his through the hologram. "Emma? She was visiting her grandmother for the summer program, remember? The cultural exchange you were so proud of her getting into." The frame containing Emma's photograph trembled in Kane's grip. His daughter, brilliant and curious, had begged for months to participate in the Terra Colonial Cultural Exchange. She wanted to learn about xenobiology, to study the unique ecosystem of Kepler 442b. Kane had been hesitant. The Outer Rim was dangerous, with increasing reports of Galactic Empire raids, but Emma's enthusiasm had worn down his military caution. "How?" The word escaped his lips as barely a whisper. Chen's jaw tightened. "Empire Battle Group Zeta 7. They broadcast demands for the colony's surrender, claiming it was harboring rebel sympathizers. When the colonists tried to negotiate, tried to explain they were neutral civilians, Chen's voice trailed off, then hardened. They glassed the entire surface. 300,000 souls, Marcus, including 47 children from the exchange program." Kane's vision blurred, but not from tears. Those would come later, in the darkness of his quarters, when no one could see the great General Kane break apart. Instead, his vision blurred with a red haze of rage so pure and consuming that it felt like looking into the heart of a star. "The Empire claims it was a military necessity," Chen continued. "Their official statement cites insurgent activities and terrorist harboring. Complete fabrication, of course, but they don't care about truth. They care about fear." Kane set the photograph down with infinite care, his movements precise despite the tremor in his hands. When he looked up, Chen saw something in the general's eyes that made him take an involuntary step back, even through the hologram. "Sir." Kane's voice was steady, professional, but underneath ran a current of something that made Chen's skin crawl. "I'm requesting immediate transfer to the Outer Rim Command. Marcus, you need time to grieve. With respect, Admiral, grief is a luxury I can't afford." Kane's smile was a terrible thing, all sharp edges and promise of violence. "My daughter believed in the goodness of people, in the possibility of peace between species, in the beauty of the universe. The Empire killed her for that belief. They killed her, and they killed 300,000 other innocents, because they could. Because no one has ever made them pay a price that mattered." Chen studied the man who had been his friend for over 2 decades. The man who had pulled him from a burning transport on Rigel Prime, who had been best man at his wedding, who had held his own daughter with such gentle care. That man was still there, somewhere, but he was being consumed by something older and infinitely more dangerous. "What are you planning, Marcus?" Kane's smile widened, and for the first time in their long friendship, Chen felt genuine fear of Marcus Kane. "I'm planning to teach the Galactic Empire the difference between killing children and fighting a war. I'm planning to show them what happens when you break a man who has nothing left to lose and everything he needs to take his revenge." After the hologram faded, Kane sat alone in his quarters, staring at Emma's photograph. She had been excited about the trip, chattering endlessly about the bioluminescent forests and the crystal formations that grew in perfect mathematical spirals. She had promised to bring him back a sample of the singing stones that hummed in harmony with the planet's magnetic field. Instead, the Empire had turned her into radioactive ash scattered across a dead world. Kane opened his personal files and began to read. Every report about Empire tactics, every analysis of their command structure, every psychological profile of their leadership. He had been studying them as enemies. Now, he would study them as prey. The transformation began that night, in the darkness of his quarters, as Kane systematically destroyed every soft part of himself that might hesitate, that might show mercy, that might remember that even Empire soldiers were someone's children. He fed his love for Emma, his grief, his hope for the future, his faith in humanity's better angels. He fed it all into a furnace of cold rage that would burn until every person responsible for his daughter's death had been made to pay. When dawn came to the ship's artificial cycle, the man who emerged from those quarters looked like General Marcus Kane, spoke like him, carried himself with the same bearing. But something essential had been excised during those dark hours, something that had kept the monster leashed. The Empire had killed a child to send a message about their power. They had no idea what message they had just received in return. Part 2. The Transformation. The funeral was held 3 weeks later on Luna Station in the Memorial Garden where Earth's silver light filtered through the massive transparent aluminum dome. Representatives from a dozen worlds attended, offering condolences and speaking in hushed tones about the tragedy of Kepler 442b. The Empire's response had been swift and brutal, not just denying responsibility, but claiming the colony had been a legitimate military target harboring terrorists. Kane stood at attention throughout the ceremony, his dress uniform perfect, his bearing that of a career military officer honoring the dead. Those who knew him well noticed the subtle changes, the way his eyes never quite focused on any one person, the mechanical precision of his responses to condolences, the absence of the warmth that had always defined Marcus Kane. Emma's casket was empty, of course. There was nothing left to bury on Kepler 442b, but irradiated dust and the lingering echoes of screams that would never be heard. Instead, they buried her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Gone Flob. Whiskers, which she had left behind because she thought she was too grown up for such things now. After the service, as the mourners dispersed and the administrative machinery of grief ground into motion, Kane found himself alone with Admiral Chen in the garden's artificial twilight. The Outer Rim transfer came through, Chen said quietly. You'll have command of the 3rd Fleet, based out of Haven Station. It's the posting you've been working toward your entire career. Kane nodded, his gaze fixed on the small marker bearing Emma's name. When do I ship out, Marcus? Chen's voice carried the weight of their long friendship. Talk to me. Tell me what you're really thinking. For a moment, the mask slipped, and Chen saw something in Kane's eyes that made him wonder if his old friend was still sane. The grief was there, certainly, but it had been compressed into something dense and weaponized, like a star collapsed into a neutron pulsar. I'm thinking that the Empire has operated for too long under the assumption that human life is cheap, Kane said softly. That they can murder our children and civilians, claim military necessity, and face no consequences beyond strongly worded diplomatic protests. I'm thinking that assumption needs to be corrected. And how do you plan to correct it? Kane's smile was a blade wrapped in silk. By making them understand that every human life they take will cost them 100 of their own. By hunting down every person who gave the order to fire on Kepler, 442b, everyone who transmitted it, everyone who pulled the trigger, and everyone who celebrated afterward. By turning their strength against them until they break. Chen felt a chill that had nothing to do with Luna's climate controls. That's not war, Marcus. That's genocide. No. Kane's voice carried absolute certainty. Genocide is what they did to Kepler 442b. What I'm planning is justice. The Empire respects only strength, only fear, only overwhelming force applied, without hesitation or mercy. They've built their entire civilization on the premise that might makes right. His eyes met Chen's, and the Admiral saw something there that would haunt his dreams for years to come. I'm going to prove them correct. The journey to Haven Station took 2 weeks aboard a military transport, and Kane used every moment to prepare. He studied the personnel files of every officer and enlisted person who would serve under his command, not looking for competence or loyalty. He had those already, but for something else. He was looking for those who had lost something to the Empire, those whose loved ones had disappeared into Empire prison worlds, those who had watched their homeworlds burn. He was building an army of the bereaved. Haven Station orbited a nameless brown dwarf in the Outer Rim, its location chosen for strategic value rather than beauty. It was a fortress and supply depot, bristling with weapons and surrounded by a constellation of defensive platforms. More importantly, it was beyond the reach of Earth's politicians and their endless committees on military ethics. Kane's first act as 3rd Fleet Commander was to call a meeting of his senior staff. 37 officers gathered in the main briefing room, men and women who had served on the frontier for years, who had seen what the Empire did to human colonies, who had been forced to follow rules of engagement that favored diplomatic solutions over military ones. Kane stood before them without notes, without a prepared speech, with nothing but the absolute certainty that had sustained him through the dark weeks since Emma's death. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily through the room, 3 weeks ago, the Galactic Empire murdered my 7-year-old daughter. They murdered her along with 300,000 other innocents on Kepler 442b, and they did it because they could. Because in their experience, humans always choose to turn the other cheek, to seek diplomatic solutions, to respond to atrocities with stern letters and economic sanctions. The room was utterly silent. Kane's reputation as a tactical genius was well known, but this was something different. This was personal. That ends today. As of this moment, the Third Fleet is no longer a defensive force. We are no longer bound by the Terran military code's restrictions on engagement with civilian populations. We are no longer interested in capturing territory or winning hearts and minds. Kane's smile was winter itself. We are a weapon of retribution, and we will not rest until every person responsible for the Kepler 442b massacre has been held accountable. Commander Sarah Torres, Kane's new chief of operations, cleared her throat. Sir, what exactly are you proposing? Total war, Kane replied without hesitation. Not against the Empire as a whole, that would be suicide, but against Battle Group Zeta-7, their command structure, their support networks, their families, their friends, everyone who made the decision to commit genocide, and everyone who helped them do it. Captain James Morrison, a veteran of the Proxima campaign, leaned forward. General, that kind of warfare, it's against every convention we've signed. The Empire will use it as propaganda. Claim we're the monsters. Kane's laugh was devoid of humor. Captain, they already call us monsters. They called my daughter a terrorist sympathizer when they vaporized her. The difference is that from now on, when they call us monsters, they'll be right. Over the following months, Kane implemented changes that transformed not just the Third Fleet's tactics, but its very nature. Traditional military protocols were replaced with something closer to insurgency warfare. Intelligence gathering became the fleet's primary focus, with networks of informants and sympathizers spreading throughout Empire space. Kane's first target was Admiral Thrax, the Zephyrian who had commanded Battlegroup Zeta-7 during the Kepler 442b massacre. Thrax was scheduled to attend a fleet review on the Empire world of Korath Prime, a heavily defended system that would normally be impossible for human forces to assault. Kane didn't assault it. Instead, he waited. Thrax's personal yacht, the Vengeance of Stars, stopped for routine maintenance at Kepler Station, a neutral trading post on the edge of Empire space. The station's human population had grown substantially in recent weeks, traders and technicians who paid their fees and kept to themselves. The explosion that destroyed the yacht was blamed on faulty reactor containment. 17 Empire crew members died along with Admiral Thrax. The station's investigation concluded that poor maintenance and substandard parts had caused a catastrophic failure. No one suspected the mild-mannered reactor technician who had gained access to the yacht's engineering section, or the fact that he had been Emma Kane's favorite teacher before the cultural exchange program had taken her to Kepler 442b. The second target was Colonel Vex, the ground forces commander who had been responsible for the final assessment that declared Kepler 442b a military target. Vex lived on Drakmor, a fortress world deep in Empire space, surrounded by layers of security that made him effectively untouchable. Kane touched him anyway. The poison was delivered in a bottle of Terran whiskey, a gift from an admirer who had read Vex's published memoir about the necessity of firm action in dealing with human colonies. The bottle was accompanied by a letter praising Vex's wisdom and requesting an autographed copy of his book. Vex died 3 days later, his nervous system shutting down as the exotic toxin destroyed his ability to process neural commands. His final moments were spent in complete paralysis, aware but unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to scream. The whiskey bottle was never found. Neither was the admirer who had sent it. As word spread through the Empire's command structure, Kane's campaign began to take on a life of its own. Officers who had served with Battle Group Zeta-7 requested transfers to safer postings. Some retired early, a few simply disappeared, their bodies found weeks later in circumstances that baffled investigators. Kane's methods were surgical, precise, and completely ruthless. He didn't attack military targets or infrastructure. He attacked people, specific individuals, who had played a role in his daughter's murder. And he attacked them not on the battlefield, where they could fight back with honor, but in their homes, their private retreats, their most secure sanctuaries. The Empire's response was predictable. They increased security for high-ranking officers, implemented new protocols for personal protection, and began a propaganda campaign about human terrorism. But they also began to show something they rarely displayed: fear. Captain Torres found Kane in his quarters 6 months after the campaign had begun, staring at a holographic display showing the locations of 43 Empire officers who had been connected to the Kepler 442b massacre. 17 names were crossed out in red. "Sir," she said quietly. "We've received new intelligence about General Crocs. He's agreed to meet with Terran diplomats about a possible ceasefire." Kane didn't look away from the display. Crocs commanded the dreadnought that actually fired the killing shot. He's number 4 on the list. He's also the highest-ranking Empire officer who's ever agreed to direct negotiations with humans. The diplomatic corps thinks this might be our chance for a real peace. Now Kane turned, and Torres saw something in his eyes that made her take a step backward. "Commander, do you know what my daughter wanted to be when she grew up?" The question caught Torres off guard. "No, sir. A xenobiologist. She wanted to study alien life forms, to find ways for different species to coexist peacefully. She believed that understanding led to acceptance, that acceptance led to cooperation, that cooperation led to peace." Kane's voice was utterly calm, utterly reasonable, and utterly terrifying. She was wrong. The only thing the Empire understands is strength. The only peace they'll accept is the peace of the grave. Torres swallowed hard. "Sir, if we kill General Crocs during peace negotiations, we'll send a message that human children are not acceptable casualties, that every person who participates in genocide will be held accountable, regardless of rank, regardless of diplomatic immunity, regardless of the political consequences." Kane smiled, and Torres understood why enemy soldiers had started calling him the Reaper. "Schedule a meeting with the General's diplomatic party. I'm sure we can find common ground." Part 3: The Monster Unleashed. The peace negotiations were scheduled to take place on Neutral Station Omega, a massive diplomatic facility built in the no-man's land between human and Empire space. The station was governed by the Galactic Accords, its security provided by a multinational force that included both human and Empire personnel. General Crocs arrived with a full diplomatic entourage, including junior officers, cultural attachés, and security personnel. The Empire media made much of the general's willingness to engage in direct dialogue with humanity, portraying him as a moderate voice seeking to prevent further bloodshed. Kane arrived alone. He walked through the station's corridors with the easy confidence of a man attending a routine briefing, acknowledging the respectful nods of station personnel and the nervous glances of Empire diplomats. His dress uniform was perfect, his bearing that of a career officer comfortable in any environment. The meeting was scheduled for Conference Room 7, a neutral space decorated with artifacts from dozens of worlds and species. Crocs sat at one end of a polished table, his scaled hide gleaming under the room's soft lighting, his forearms folded in the formal gesture of diplomatic attention. Kane entered exactly on time, took his seat across from the general, and smiled. "General Crocs," he said pleasantly, "thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I believe we have a great deal to discuss." Crocs's translator rendered his words in slightly accented standard. "General Kane, your reputation precedes you, though I confess some confusion about your recent activities. The Empire seeks peace between our peoples." "As do I," Kane replied, his tone conversational. "In fact, I'm hoping we can reach an understanding today that will prevent any further violence between our forces." The negotiations proceeded according to diplomatic protocols. Crocs spoke of the Empire's desire for stability in the Outer Rim, of the regrettable necessity that had led to the Kepler High Skies 442b incident, of the mutual benefits that would flow from a formal ceasefire agreement. Kane listened politely, occasionally asking clarifying questions, taking notes on a small datapad. To the security cameras recording the session, to the cultural attachés present as witnesses, to Crocs himself, he appeared to be exactly what he claimed, a military officer exploring the possibilities for peace. Only when Crocs leaned forward to emphasize a particularly important point did Kane move. The blade that slid between the general's ribs was impossibly thin, designed to penetrate the gaps in Crocs's natural armor plating. It was coated with a neurotoxin that paralyzed its victim while leaving their higher brain functions intact. Crocs's eyes widened in shock, then in understanding, then in terror as his body began to shut down. Kane continued to smile pleasantly as the general slumped forward onto the conference table. "You're wondering how I got a weapon past the security scanners," Kane said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "The answer is that I didn't. The blade was printed in the station's public fabrication unit using specifications I uploaded during my arrival processing. The handle was fashioned from components in my datapad. The toxin was synthesized in the station's medical bay, where I've been volunteering my time to help treat refugees from recent conflicts." Crocs's breathing became labored, but his eyes remained focused on Kane with intelligent horror. "The security footage will show that you suffered what appears to be a massive cardiac event during our negotiations. Very tragic, but these things happen when elderly soldiers push themselves too hard." Kane leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But you'll know the truth. In your final moments, you'll know that you died because you murdered my daughter." Crox's attempt to call for help emerged as barely a whisper. Kane sat back in his chair and waited patiently as the neurotoxin completed its work. When station security arrived, summoned by Kane himself, they found him performing CPR on the collapsed general. His desperate attempts to revive Crox were witnessed by dozens of people, recorded by multiple cameras, and later praised by Empire diplomats as evidence of Kane's humanitarian instincts. The post-mortem examination revealed massive organ failure consistent with a rare but natural cardiac condition that sometimes affected elderly Zephyrians. The traces of exotic compounds in Crox's bloodstream were attributed to experimental medications he had been taking for chronic pain. No one suspected that Kane had spent months studying Zephyrian physiology, or that he had specifically designed a toxin that would mimic the symptoms of natural death. The Empire's response to Crox's death was swift and brutal. They declared the ceasefire negotiations a failure, blamed human treachery for the general's assassination, and launched a series of retaliatory strikes against human colonies in the Outer Rim. The attacks were precise and surgical, targeting military installations and industrial facilities rather than civilian populations. The Empire had learned from Kane's campaign that indiscriminate killing of innocents carried too high a price. Kane's response was to escalate. The next phase of his campaign abandoned all pretense of surgical strikes or targeted assassinations. If the Empire wanted to treat this as total war, Kane would oblige them. The first target was the Empire Supply Depot at Zirian Prime, a massive facility that supported their military operations throughout the sector. Rather than attacking the depot itself, which was heavily defended, Kane targeted the civilian transport vessels that carried supplies to the facility. 37 ships were destroyed over the course of 2 weeks, their crews killed by explosive devices placed in cargo containers, by viruses uploaded to their navigation computers, by toxic gases released into their environmental systems. The attacks were untraceable, seemingly random, but they shared one characteristic. They were all connected to Zirian Prime. The depot was forced to shut down when no civilian contractor would risk the journey. The second target was the Empire recruiting station on Valkara, where young aliens were processed for military service. Kane didn't attack the station, he attacked the families of the recruits. Parents found their children's acceptance letters replaced with detailed descriptions of what had happened to the crew members of the ships that had glassed Kepler 442b. Siblings received packages containing footage from the colony's final moments, enhanced to show the faces of the children who had died in the cultural exchange program. The psychological warfare was precise and devastating. Recruitment dropped by 70% within a month, but it was Kane's third target that truly announced his transformation from military commander to something else entirely. Admiral Vorth had been Crox's immediate superior, the man who had given the order to declare Kepler 442b a military target. Unlike his subordinates, Vorth had learned from the fate of his colleagues. He had retreated to a fortress world deep in Empire space, surrounded by multiple layers of security and an entire battle fleet dedicated to his protection. Kane didn't try to reach him there. Instead, he went after Vorth's family. The Admiral's mate and 3 offspring lived on a pastoral world far from any military installation, in a compound protected by private security forces. They were civilians, non-combatants, completely innocent of any involvement in Vorth's military decisions. Kane killed them all. The attack was swift and overwhelming. A team of human commandos, their faces hidden behind masks that bore Emma Kane's photograph, stormed the compound in the pre-dawn hours. They disabled the security systems, neutralized the guards, and systematically executed every member of Vorth's family. The youngest was 6 years old, roughly Emma's age when she had died on Kepler 442b. Kane left a message at the scene, carved into the wall of the family's dining room in letters 3 feet high. "You killed our children. Now you know how it feels." The galaxy's reaction was immediate and horrifying. Every major news network carried footage of the massacre, of the small bodies covered in sheets, of the message written in the innocent blood. Human governments rushed to condemn the attack, calling it terrorism and promising that those responsible would be brought to justice. The Empire's response was more measured, but infinitely more dangerous. Emperor Zarthak himself appeared in a public broadcast, his reptilian features cold with fury, and declared that humanity had revealed its true nature. For generations they have claimed to be a peaceful species, interested only in exploration and cooperation, the Emperor said, his words transmitted to billions of beings across known space. But when pressed, when their facade is stripped away, we see what they really are: animals, savage beasts who murder children to satisfy their bloodlust. Kane watched the broadcast from his quarters aboard the UES Retribution, alone with his thoughts and Emma's photograph. He felt no satisfaction at the Emperor's words, no vindication that his campaign was succeeding. He felt nothing at all, which he recognized as a kind of success in itself. A soft chime indicated an incoming message, and Admiral Chen's image appeared in the holographic display. His old friend looked haggard, aged by more than the months that had passed since their last conversation. "Marcus," Chen began, his voice heavy with exhaustion and grief, "I'm here to relieve you of command. The Terran Senate has voted unanimously to recall you for court-martial. The charges include murder, terrorism, crimes against sentient beings, and violation of the laws of war." Kane nodded calmly. "I understand. Do you?" Chen's voice cracked. "Marcus, what have you become? That family you butchered, those children, they were innocents. They had nothing to do with Emma's death." "Neither did Emma have anything to do with any rebellion," Kane replied, his voice utterly steady. "The Empire killed her anyway. They killed her because she was human, because she was convenient, because they could. I've simply applied their own logic." "This isn't logic, it's madness." Kane's smile was gentle, almost paternal. "David, do you know what I've discovered over these past months? The Empire was right about one thing. The universe is a cruel place where the strong prey upon the weak. For centuries, humanity has tried to pretend otherwise. We built laws and treaties and moral codes all designed to convince ourselves that civilization can triumph over barbarism." He stood and moved to the viewport, gazing out at the stars that had once seemed full of promise and wonder. Emma believed in that fiction. She thought she could study alien species, learn from them, build bridges between our civilizations. The Empire taught her the truth in her final moments. There are no bridges, only predators and prey. The question isn't whether you'll be cruel, it's whether you'll be cruelly effective or cruelly weak. Chen's image flickered, either from interference or from the tears in his eyes. "They're calling you the Butcher of Valkara, the monster of the Outer Rim. Is that what you want your legacy to be?" Kane turned from the viewport, and for a moment, Chen saw not the friend he had known for decades, but something else entirely. Something that wore Marcus Kane's face, but had been hollowed out and filled with purpose more terrible than any emotion. "My legacy is that every species in this galaxy now knows what happens when you kill human children. My legacy is that the next time some alien commander considers glassing one of our colonies, he'll remember Admiral Vorth's family and think twice. My legacy is that Emma's death meant something." Kane moved to his desk and picked up her photograph, studying the innocent smile that had once represented everything good in the universe. "You want to court-martial me, David? Go ahead, but understand this. I didn't break the rules of war. I learned them. The Empire taught me that civilians are acceptable casualties, that children are legitimate targets, that genocide is a tool of policy. They wrote those rules with my daughter's blood." He set the photograph down carefully, as if it were made of the most fragile crystal. "I simply played by their rules better than they did." Kane surrendered himself to custody without resistance, allowing himself to be escorted aboard Chen's flagship in restraints that they both knew were entirely symbolic. As the transport prepared to depart for Earth and the court-martial that awaited him, Kane stood at the viewport one final time, watching the stars of the Outer Rim fade into the distance. Behind him, secure in hidden bunkers throughout human space, the networks he had built continued their work. Officers trained in his methods, intelligence assets cultivated during his campaign, sleeper agents placed in positions throughout Empire territory, all of it activated by deadman switches that would trigger if anything happened to their creator. The Empire had killed a child and believed they were sending a message about their power. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous than any army or fleet. They had created a human being who truly understood that the universe was a place where the strong devoured the weak, and who had decided to become the strongest predator of all. Kane's court-martial would last 6 months. He would be convicted on all charges and sentenced to life imprisonment on the maximum security facility at Titan Prime. The Empire would claim victory, pointing to his capture as proof that justice still existed in a civilized galaxy. They would be wrong. Because Kane had learned the most important lesson of all. The man who destroys his weak self, who burns away every trace of mercy and compassion and human feeling, can never be destroyed by others. Such a man becomes a force of nature, as relentless and inevitable as entropy itself. The Empire had wanted to teach humanity a lesson about power. Instead, they had taught one human being about the only power that truly mattered, the willingness to become the monster that your enemies feared most. And in the darkness of space, that lesson would echo for generations to come. End of document.